This is made from a 22 gauge steel. We tried soldering it, we tried brazing it, we tried welding, but none of it was working. And so what we have here are L clips bolted on and sealed with JB weld. The accumulator mount back here, we have two large U-bolts with foam insulation to hold the accumulators on. That's attached to a piece of 16 gauge steel. Underneath here, we have a metal clamp hold this top plate on to the bottom like such. So this is taken from a bent up, cut up, just random piece of scrap metal. We have the pump and motor mount. The pump mount is pretty straightforward. It's just a flat sheet of 16 gauge steel that has the hole cut out and the bolt holes for both the pump and the motor respectively. This being a flat piece that is assumed to be parallel with this, that way the pump and also the motor sprocket would be lined up.
You have your fluid sitting in your reservoir. The fluid is then being pulled as you pedal because the pump is siphoning out the fluid. That fluid would then be going into the pump. We have it placed lower than our reservoir, essentially so it can easily accept the fluid. It's taking in the fluid from this line, which is coming up to the reservoir there. It spends the fluid as the operator is driving the bicycle, and then it's sending that fluid to this bottom line all the way up and then back into that P1 port. That fluid from that initial port is being sent into the motor inlet, being spent at the motor, and it's being exhausted out of the motor from this top port all the way back up, and then you follow it back into this T2 port. We have an ideally filled and pressurized accumulator that we would like to dispense to the wheels. We would do so by send the fluid down into this line, and essentially it would go into this port P3. That's gonna go down into this port P2, being sent back to the motor all the way through into the in port and being sent back into the out port. You go all the way up again, and then you enter the port T2. That's going to be cycled into the manifold, back into the T1 port, where it is then cycled around this bottom line. It goes, and then it's sent back into this hybrid line that I had mentioned earlier. If for some reason you did not want to expend accumulator pressure to the wheels, we have this line body with this mechanical needle valve implemented onto it, so you can safely expend this back into the reservoir if need be. We have a hybrid line. It's basically a return and a suction line in our reservoir out the front. So in our regen, essentially the motor is being engaged. So you have your line coming down, and then that's going into port T1. You follow that line all the way down, and that's going into the motor, out of the motor. You go into T2, and you follow that through the manifold, and then the fluid would be sent all the way through, and then follow that in. It's going to be going into this line, which is going to essentially be going back up into the accumulators. This is a system where you can disconnect the motor. You can use that continuously cycling fluid in the motor to the wheels, and you can also directly charge the accumulators this way. You have your motor, or your pump, excuse me, engaged by your driver. You're following this line that's sending fluid into the manifold. Obviously the fluid being pulled from that reservoir, and then pump and the motor are disconnected, and the motor is pulling its fluid from this bottom port, and it's sending its fluid back into T2, and then that leaves this back port, this P3 port. This would be open essentially, and successfully charge your accumulators this way.